to People Like Us, a podcast for and about third culture kids everywhere. I'm Jen Mohindra. I'm also a TCK, and I have a Facebook group for TCK adults called, unsurprisingly, People Like Us. Hi, Steph. Thanks for joining me today for this first podcast of mine.
Hi, you're welcome. It's very good to be here as the first person.
Excellent. So what I'm really interested to know about is, where did you grow up?
So I grew up in the Middle East, in Bahrain, and I went there when I had just turned 2 years old. So I was born in Scotland, and then my mum and dad and I moved to Bahrain just about the time that I turned 2, and lived there until I was 10.
So Scotland and then Bahrain, and then what came next?
After that, back to Scotland, but a couple of different parts of Scotland. We lived kind of in Glasgow. We lived further north than that over the course of a few years, and then after that, we moved to Northern Ireland. So, although that was still within the UK, that actually also felt like a very different place to be. It was the mid-80s when we went there. The Troubles were still in full force. It was quite a kind of different environment, I guess, to what living in Scotland had been like. And then once I'd kind of was of an age to go to college and go to university, I moved back to Scotland then at that point.
So the move to Northern Ireland sounds like a bit of a challenging one.
It was a challenging one because when we went there, I was 14, and I'd probably really only just started to get settled in Scotland after coming back from the Middle East. That took quite a while, actually, for me to kind of adapt to living in the UK again after growing up in a completely different country and different environment. So we were off again. We went to Belfast. I was 14, which I don't think is a great age probably for moving around and starting new school and all of that kind of thing anyway. It was a different kind of place to be because there were still regular things happening like bomb scares, and the army was still present, and we lived in an army town. A lot of people thought I was an army kid. I wasn't. My dad's an engineer and he worked at Harland and Wolff, which is a big shipbuilding yard in Belfast. But people made that assumption because we lived in a barracks town. And yeah, it just was a strange kind of time, I suppose.
So yeah, 14 is a bit of a tricky time for anyone, I think, but with that sort of move involved as well. How did you find, making new friends and adapting to school life at that time?
I found it really hard, actually. I mean, I suppose it hadn't been my choice to go there in the first place. You know, I was taken there by my parents because of Dad's job. So there was already, I hadn't particularly wanted to go, you know, it was just something that kind of happened to me. And I suppose being more of an introverted person by nature anyway, I found it quite difficult to just integrate in and find my place there. It was a big school, much bigger than the one I'd been at before. There was differences just in the actual education side of things, like some subjects I was ahead, some subjects I was behind. There was all of that kind of going on. And I think at that age, people were starting to form their friendship groups, their kind of little cliques. It just seemed really hard to blend in. And yeah, it was a really difficult time for me, for sure. It really was. The first year, at least, of being there was really challenging.
And prior to Belfast, you mentioned a couple of moves within Scotland,
Yeah.
Bahrain, Scotland, Belfast. That sounds like a lot of moving, uprooting, upheaval.
Yeah, the move from Bahrain to Scotland was definitely the hardest, I think, because I went there when I was 2 years old. So all of my first memories were of being there. I couldn't remember anything about being in Scotland.
Oh,
So although I knew I was Scottish, because mum and dad are, um, I didn't feel like I was, because it wasn't a place that I had any kind of connection with. And I grew up in Bahrain, and it's a very different, well, it's probably about as different to Scotland as you
yes.
can get in terms of the climate, the way we did things, or what we did with our time, the culture, the language, everything was different. And when we came back, I found it such a massive, it was like being ripped out of my life and put down into a new life. And it
Mm,
was really difficult. And I think it was hard as well because there was people's expectation that I had come home and that would be good for me, but it didn't feel like home to me. It, you know, I'd been to Scotland obviously lots of times to visit
mm.
family and all of that kind of stuff, but it didn't feel like my home. And so to be kind of put down there, and then to this, the assumption being that I was back home now and that would be nice for me, just didn't feel like that at all. It's very weird.
Yeah, if all your memories had been of Bahrain and obviously not the first 2 years of your life, then going home to your passport country is, in essence, feeling like a foreigner in what's supposed to be your home, which is a mental challenge in itself.
It is, and I think at that age as well. I mean, I suppose in a way kids are adaptable, and again, it wasn't my choice. You know, we
Mm,
went because of Dad's job. Um, it I suppose on the one hand you get on with it because you're not having to deal with adulty things like mum and dad did, like finding new jobs and all of that kind of stuff. You kind of go to school and that's where you're expected to just make your life. But it just felt really difficult. It was, I think it was the complete culture shock, but in my own home country, it was
yeah.
really difficult. Yeah, just didn't feel like I kind of fitted in there.
So I'm going to ask you a question. Knowing that you're Scottish and hearing that you don't have an obviously Scottish accent, what sort of reactions do you get, or what sort of questions do you get around your accent?
I get people asking me, where are you from? But in a kind of quizzical way, like they can't quite place it. Um, I just say now I'm Scottish because that just seems like the easiest thing to say. And I guess, of course, I suppose I am Scottish, technically. Um, but I, and then I always, the next question is always, you don't have much of an accent, which then kind of feels like it requires some kind of explanation. Um,
Mm,
if I can be bothered, I can't always be bothered. But I usually just say, yes, I am Scottish, kind of by nationality, but I haven't actually spent that much of my life in Scotland. So that's why I've got a bit of a mixed accent, and just kind of leave it at that.
yeah, it's that thing, isn't it, of the where are you from, and your response doesn't quite match the expectations of the person asking, and then the
Yeah.
follow-up question, but where are you really from?
Yeah. And the other thing that happens a lot is people say, um, where are you from? So if I say, well, I'm Scottish, and then they start asking me questions about Scotland, And oh, how often do you go there? And oh, do you get back often to see your family and stuff like that? And then it kind of opens up another thing, which is, well, no, because I don't actually feel like that's my home, and I don't really actually have that much connection with Scotland. I don't really have any family there anymore. And then it all just opens up another kind of strange conversation. It's like, so you don't sound Scottish, but you've just said that you are, but now you're saying that you actually don't ever go there or have any connection with the place. So what are you?
Yes, too confusing
Yeah,
for
confusing,
many.
definitely.
Do you find that you have what is often, I think, common for third culture kids is to have, if you like, a pre-prepared catalogue of answers to the where are you from question, depending on who's asking you. So you can either say Scotland, or maybe you pad that out a little bit, or maybe you've got an even longer answer.
Yeah, I think I probably do. And I suppose I've never actually consciously thought about it like that. But yeah, I think I do. It's much easier now as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
I remember as a child, I found that question impossibly difficult to answer, um, because it was just confusing. But yeah, I do have a kind of stock answer. I do have a bit of a bat it away if I can't really be bothered, going into it all answer.
Yeah.
And then there's certain cues, if people actually show an interest, that I will say more, but actually most of the time people don't. They just kind of go, oh, okay, and just leave it at that.
Yeah, they just want a quick answer. Do we have something in common? Yes, let's go with that. No, okay, let's move on.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've found this, but people really make assumptions about you as well. I've found, depending on how much you give away, they either make assumptions about your life or
Mhm.
your parents, or I don't know, all sorts of different things. And sometimes, I suppose, depending what mood I'm in, I can either feel like going into that or else not, just depending. It's a kind of weird, I wouldn't say, I was going to say minefield. It's not a minefield. It's not that complicated, but I suppose it's something that other people don't necessarily have to think about.
Yeah, it's that question, isn't it? Where are you from? It seems like such a simple question. It's only 4 words,
Yeah,
words with multiple layers of hidden meaning.
yeah, I know. How do you answer it then?
I think I'm the classic TCK in terms of I have my pre-prepared catalogue of answers, and
Yeah,
depending on where I am, how I'm feeling, who's asking, I pick out one of the answers and roll with that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's funny, isn't it? And there's been lots of times that I've wished I could just say, I'm from Glasgow. End of. That's where I'm from. That's where I grew up. That's where I went to school. But it just, because it would just be easier. Um,
Yeah, I get that too. I mean, I'm from Edinburgh. You wouldn't know from my accent.
no.
And, I kind of clung to, yes, I'm from Scotland, knowing that I'd been born there, but nobody ever believes me. So, where would you say that you feel the most like a foreigner?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. And I think, hmm, I think I've probably moved past that feeling now. I think
Mm-hmm,
because I feel like I've kind of established my own life now in a
mm-hmm,
place that I consider to be my home, and kind of worked out what that means for me. And it's not attached to my roots, it's just attached to me and who I'm with and what I'm doing. I suppose I don't really have that feeling like a foreigner thing
mm-hmm.
anymore. I definitely, as a child and as a kind of young teenager, I always felt like a foreigner in the UK. I felt like an outsider. I felt different. But I
Mm.
don't feel like that now.
Hmm.
That feeling is gone, thankfully.
Yes. So home is the current state rather than where you were born and brought up, sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think I've kind of got to a place now where actually I like that, because I do look at people who have been born and brought up in the same town and all their family are there and their friends are there and they can go back to their home city and see all the things that are familiar to them. And, you know, there's stuff that I grew up with that I know I'll never see again, probably. And that
Hmm.
makes me quite sad in a lot of ways.
Mm.
But on the other hand, I now kind of like the fact that I don't have those ties to a place. And if I wanted to just pack up my bags and move on to a new place, I wouldn't have that sense of leaving deep roots behind me, um,
Hmm.
or leaving my family behind me, or leaving the place that I've always lived behind me, because I don't have that. So in some
Mm.
ways, it feels quite freeing, I suppose.
So a sort of liberating sense of freedom that comes with it.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I don't feel like, you know, if I look at my husband, for example, and he's born and brought up in Norfolk, in Norwich, and, you know, he doesn't live there now because as an adult, he started moving around the UK for work and stuff like that.
Hmm.
He has all those memories of when we go there. There's all the nostalgia coming of places that he's been, stuff that happened in all these different places. We can't walk through the town without him bumping into someone that he went to school with or whatever. I don't have
Mm.
any of that stuff
Yeah,
ever. Um, but then I wouldn't feel that pull to remain close to a place or to go back there because I haven't ever put those roots down. And yeah, I suppose I do find that quite liberating in a way.
sure. What about your career? Would you say that's been impacted from growing up as a TCK?
Well, I don't know, but it's funny. I was thinking about this because I knew that I was going to be speaking to you, and I was kind
Mm.
of just having a bit of a ponder about. I've thought about a lot about how it impacted me as a kid, but not so much maybe what parts of that I've taken with me into being an adult.
Yeah.
And I suppose in some ways, I don't think it influenced my choice of career,
Hmm.
really. But I suppose I was drawn to a career which would enable me to travel or live in different countries, um, even though I never did it.
Mm.
Um, but I think I got my previous career was working in market research, and it's relatively easy to move to different parts of the world and do that job. And that was always something about it that appealed to me, because I always thought at some point that that's what I would do. Um, so maybe it influenced me in that way. Um, and maybe so, because being a researcher is very much about exploring how people do things, why people behave in certain ways, and where they're coming from a kind of psychological perspective. So maybe there is an element of that, because that's always interested me from
Hmm.
being around different types of people and different cultures.
And now with your work as a coach, do you feel that it's, let's say, influenced your coaching? I mean, there's the sort of generally an ability to a greater level of empathy or understanding of different cultures. Do you think that's helped you with your coaching?
I think possibly it has, yeah. I think it gives you the empathy of knowing what it feels like to feel unsettled, or to feel that things aren't just quite the way you want them to be, or to have that feeling that you're a bit unanchored or unrooted. Even though from my coaching clients, might be experiencing those feelings for different reasons, the feeling is the feeling.
Mm.
Um, and I know what it is like to feel like that. So yeah, maybe it does help bring that empathy, I suppose, to just feel that you're kind of slightly out of kilter with your life or what you should be doing or how you should be feeling.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that and how you think you should be feeling. I think that's
Yeah.
a common TCK thing of, you're so used to having to fit into different places and thinking about how you should be in certain settings. So what techniques would you say you've used to fit into places?
Well, I think for me, um, I don't know if it's a technique, but certainly I'm really sure, having thought about it, that how I fitted in was almost by hanging back and becoming more of an observer than a participant in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
And I think that was because it was partly a feeling of wanting to suss things out and get the lie of the land before
Hmm.
diving into something. I think it was partly self censorship in a way, because I know I always had a feeling that if I spoke too much about the early part of my life and what my life was like, which to me was completely natural and just my life, if I talked about things like going to the beach all the time, or everyone had a swimming pool, or doing all these kind of things, that you just sound like a bit of a tosser in some ways, because that's just so far away from what other people's upbringing was like. So I think I picked picked and chose very carefully when I divulged those kind of bits of information,
Hmm.
because that was a way of fitting in. Um, and so that kind of self censorship, not lying, but just not volunteering certain things, because I knew that people just couldn't relate. And you don't want to be in a position where you're saying things that mean people won't be able to relate to you. So I suppose for me, a technique of fitting in was actually kind of holding back,
Mm.
um, and not saying too much in a weird way.
So the avoidance of being seen to be bragging about
Yeah,
your experiences when, to us that's our everyday, but then to move into another culture, whether it be the home culture or somewhere else, there's often that thing of, oh, well, you did this and this, and there's that sense of, oh, you're bragging about it. So yeah, I totally get the holding back, sort of
yeah,
sitting, sussing out the scene, taking it from there.
yeah, totally. Yeah. And I think that's probably one of the biggest ways that it's impacted me, um, for sure. Yeah.
I think that even goes back to the perpetually difficult question for us of the where are you from, in terms of sometimes just giving a brief answer, because if you start listing all the places, then you're at risk of killing the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think, especially not so much now, but still a little bit, but in my younger days, um, and certainly when we very first moved back to Scotland, if people said, "Where are you from?" and I said Bahrain, nobody knew where that was. You know, it's
uh,
not like saying America or Germany or something. Everyone just goes, "What? Where's that?" And you know, even that just sometimes just felt kind of, well, it wasn't hard to answer, as in I just said, "Oh, it's in the Middle East," and but because it was a place that so few people had actually heard of,
mm.
it somehow made it sound more unusual or more weird or more different or something. So yeah, that was a strange one as well.
Yeah, I think sometimes there's a sort of underlying sort of reading between the lines when you're asked that question. There's an implication that where are you from? Well, you're obviously not from around here, which amplifies the feeling of feeling like a foreigner or somebody different.
Yeah. And it's funny how it still crops up in day-to-day life, because cultural references, for example, there's still one that gets me on a regular basis: TV programs,
Yes.
stuff from your childhood. um, Even if it comes up in conversation now with people that I don't necessarily know that well, and if I say I don't know that program, or I haven't heard of it, or I mentioned something, and you just get that blank look on people's faces. It kind of sparks it up again. That whole thing of, well, what, you're not from here, and where are you from? And yeah, it's funny.
Yeah.
Just actually on this weekend, we were watching TV, and someone in the TV program said something about going to Dairy Queen. And I said to my husband, "Oh my God, when I was little, going to Dairy Queen was such a treat. I just loved going there." And he just went, "What's Dairy Queen?" And it's like, and there you go. That's just
Yes.
another like
It's funny,
example of
isn't
it.
it? These things keep popping up from time to time, even.
Yeah.
Um, so almost up to the end of our discussion here, but just one final question is, what do you think is the best thing about being a TCK?
I think without a doubt, for me, it's having experienced firsthand what it's like to live in another place. I
Mhm,
think it does give you insights into other cultures,
mhm,
to other ways of living. Where I lived, it was an Islamic culture that people spoke Arabic. It was
mhm.
really
Yeah,
and culturally very different. And I wouldn't change that for anything, because I'm sure it does give you tolerance or interest or insight into how other people live their lives. And I think that's really important. And it has given me loads of cool memories of different places, that I've been, and things like that. And yeah, I think I would never change it. Definitely being a TCK does present a few challenges, but for me, the benefits of it massively outweigh the challenges. I think it just gives you a really good, rounded view of the world, and that the world is bigger than just the town that you live in.
absolutely. It certainly is. And that's so nice to hear. We hear a lot about the challenges of being a TCK, but yes, the benefits, as you say, absolutely there.
Definitely.
Thank you so much for talking with me this afternoon. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's been great talking to you. Thank you for having me.
All right, no worries. Thanks, Steph. Thanks for listening to People Like Us. If you'd like to join an online community full of people like us, hop over to Facebook and search for People Like Us. You'll find my group, and you're very welcome to join us.